after the REPL, what comes next?
Get your ReOC.
ReOC, but I'll leave this to you guys because I'm not a ReOC holder. I'm just a pleasant little REPL holder.
So if you're an REPL holder, how are you working with a ReOC? How does this work?
Because the guy to the right of me on my screen is my boss, and he has his operator accreditation, and I work under him.
There you go.
Yeah, me that side. Oh, that side.
I'll start it off, and then I'm sure we'll all throw our 2 cents in there. So the ReOC, which is a remote operator certificate, essentially it's licensing the company, right? So the company holds the ReOC, and then us four obviously have REPL licenses, which allows us to operate under that ReOC. So, so the ReOC itself, I think it's important to call out that you cannot go do operations under a ReOC unless you have an REPL licensed operator, a licensed person. And there's there's a whole bunch of additional permissions that allows a ReOC holder to do, for example, flying at night. And it's not just turning up and flying at night. There's a whole bunch of guidelines and within our manual of standards that we need to actually follow. So, so I think it allows us to carry much more complex operations. Obviously, Danny talked a little bit earlier around Sydney Airport, I think was one of the jobs. So, you know, if you had an REPL, don't have a ReOC, you wouldn't be able to even apply to get a permit. So you've got to have a ReOC to actually apply for a permit. And then fingers crossed, a few $100 later, you may not get that anyway. So
That's right.
If you're thorough enough with your applications, I guess 90% of the time the applications go through. It just depends on the complexity of it, what you're doing.
Yeah. And I think it's good to be aware of that. You actually have to sit an exam or it's probably an exam. You get questioned through CASA to be
Grilled.
Very thorough exam.
Don't you guys actually, like, obviously I haven't done it, but don't you guys actually have to go through a hypothetical operation with them where they basically pose this thing to you, then you have to go through that and literally make the safe operation and go through all the steps to do so, from what I understand. But obviously
it really shows you how complex the most simple operation is. Like when you operate under ReOC, there's no I'm just going to go fly over here. It's okay, you need your JSAs, you need your risk assessments, you know, you need to know everything that could go wrong or is going to happen on those operations.
Yes, I think the best thing to do is there is an operational procedure and manuals that we all have to adhere under. And each of us obviously have our own set, but there's a standard template that you'll start off from. But as Brendan called out earlier.
And you do have to write your own operations manuals, don't you? And still have them signed off via CASA as well for your operator's license?
I'm pretty sure now there actually is a standardized manual you can kind of download from the CASA site, and then you, don't hold me to this. It's kind of, you download it and kind of manipulate what you need to suit your operations, but that will get scrutinized down to every single word, abbreviation, everything through CASA when you actually submit it.
Yep.
And if you want to change anything as well, it costs more money.
Yeah.
So I think that those ops procedures and manuals definitely much more detailed. The other, I think, important step is making sure all the REPL persons that are operating under the ReOC are actually familiar with those. They actually need to sign off that they've actually read it.
Actually, our Bible, really.
Yep. Yeah. And it's great because I think we all agree it's great to have those standards, and as long as it's practical to use them. So there's no point writing something you're never going to look at. So,
hey, Sean, right now's a really good chance if you wanted to test tie on anything.
Now we catch up fairly.
Don't you dare?
Yeah, not right now.
If it's like night operations, for example, we don't always do night operations, obviously. So it's you have to go back, refamiliarize yourself with it. We go through it together. I'm sure we all do it, right? So
yeah. You got to run your eyes over your procedures and manuals all the time, just to refresh what you're actually supposed to be what you're being held accountable for. Because at the end of the day, those procedures and manuals that you're operating amongst or with are all legally binding documents. So if you do something and it goes wrong and you haven't followed your procedures and manuals, you're in the shit, basically. It's almost
Are you
like...
listening, Ty? I'm in the shit.
Yeah.
But it's true. The ReOC holder is actually responsible for the REPL, the pilots, and every operation. And you're essentially, like, we use automated software.
Anything that I do as a pilot, if anything I do as a pilot, if I essentially stuff up and I start doing silly things and that could end up causing us a bit of trouble, unfortunately for Sean, that's all on Sean.
But
well, to an extent anyway.
If you're doing anything outside of
definitely something that you've got to be aware of.
Yeah. In saying that, when the chief remote pilot does their flight authorization, if the REPL holder does anything outside of what they've authorized, then it's on the remote pilot, not the chief remote pilot.
Yeah.
I learned that one.
And I think that's the other important thing as well, because the ReOC stays with the company or the entity. You have to, within that company, obviously nominate a chief remote pilot who oversees all of the operations that happen within that organization. And that chief remote pilot can change, and whoever, it's a bit of a process, because every chief remote pilot you nominate has to go through the same process of being interviewed by CASA, and it's almost like going for your application for your ReOC again. And it's a painful process, but it's part of it. They have to make sure that you understand the role that you're taking on. You understand what you're going to be legally bounded by with those documents to operate your procedures and manuals. And then once they're satisfied, then you become chief remote pilot. But you're not going to put someone in a position where they kind of know what they're doing, but not really. They haven't read the procedures and manuals. Or it's not a situation CASA want to put themselves in either. And I don't think the business will want to put them in a position where they don't have someone that's competent in that role.
Yeah, which, funny enough, actually, that's pretty much what happened with me. So the company I work for, Hoverscape, started casual, working with them, worked my way up through it, and then I essentially took over the role of chief remote pilot. But to do that, it was a week of grind. It was one blur. I remember that Friday night, once I actually got the sign off, it's like 6 p.m. got the sign off from CASA. I'm not much of a drinker, but I drank that night.
I bet you did.
It was the end of a very long week.
Mate, I drank when I got home from my REPL. So I imagine you definitely drank when you got home from that.
It's definitely stressful. There's no doubt. But it's like you said, there's a lot of responsibility. So I think anyone doing that chief role, you're not going to just do it because you like to. So
and I think
the other fun.
The other layer of it as well is the chief remote pilot, and then there's other I guess roles within that ReOC that people can hold as well, like the maintenance and things like that of the aircraft. So there's other things that it's not just the chief remote pilot. Like, myself, I'm the maintenance person. I oversee the operations, everything like that. But as the team grows and everything like that, then you've got roles to be able to put people in responsibilities for. And I think that's exciting for people in this space, because it's not just like you can just be a remote pilot for someone that has a ReOC. There are other responsibilities within a ReOC that people can take on that the chief remote pilot doesn't necessarily have to do and oversee. So there are avenues and ways that you're not just a remote pilot. You can take on responsibility for part of that ReOC within that company. And I think that's exciting within the business. I mean, within our industry, it's not just your operator or your remote operating certificate holder. There's two different aspects of it.
It's a good way of growing through a company. Even like, say, there is bigger companies out there that have, I don't even know how many pilots under them. And I admit, I'd imagine that the chief remote pilot would have his hands full, or her hands full with paperwork. But there is software out there actually that makes our life a lot easier. There's automated compliance software these days, which we'll name a few in another episode. I'm sure of it.